Welcome into another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by thehoosier.com. John Alden with you as always. Glad to have you on board. And here we are, just a few days away now from Indiana football's first ever appearance in the Big Ten championship game in none other than Indianapolis, Indiana, Lucas Oil Stadium, just a little ways up the road. I saw somebody say this, and it may be stating the obvious, but it's still worth mentioning. The closest school in the Big Ten to Indianapolis, where the championship game is always played, is a team that people thought would never, ever make to the championship game. And that becomes no longer true beginning on Saturday, as the Hoosiers will take on the Ohio State Buckeyes, a team that is very familiar with winning championships of all kinds. And it's going to be such an awesome thing to take in. Like, I still don't even really think, like, as a fan, that it is set in, like, this is reality. Even dating back to last year, this whole 2 years of Kurt Signetti still, in some way, shape, or form, feels like a fever dream. And I'm sure only Indiana fans can relate to that sentiment, just because I don't think you could ask every single Indiana fan on the planet, even the most optimistic of the bunch. I don't think a single one could tell you with a straight face that Indiana football would ever do the things that they've done in the last 2 seasons. And they have a chance to, well, they've already topped that, by the way, the regular season wise. You go from 11-1 to 12-0. And you have a chance to win a conference title for the first time since 1967, same year that they went to the Rose Bowl and lost to USC. And then after that, it's the playoff, and you try to do something you couldn't do last year, which was win a playoff game. Not only that, you're more than likely going to get a bye no matter what, unless this game against Ohio State is horribly lopsided in favor of the Buckeyes. I think that's the only situation or scenario that could happen where Indiana maybe falls out of that, top 4. At the same time, though, it still may be unlikely that they drop all the way down to number 5. Who knows? Again, we'll cross that bridge if and when we get there. But either way, we're in unprecedented territory. I hope you guys are excited for the ride that is to come with this upcoming college football postseason. So we're going to talk about more of that with Mitchell Paige here very shortly. We're also going to welcome in my good friend and coworker, Nick Coffey, into the show because Indiana basketball has a big matchup with the Louisville Cardinals once again. 3rd year in a row playing Louisville. 2 years ago, it was in Madison Square Garden. It was the game, if you remember, where Indiana got the win, of course, but former Louisville head coach Kenny Payne said that Mike Woodson had tricked him or something like that by going to a 2-3 zone. Of course, the following game last year was not so happy for Indiana basketball, and in fact, it was kind of the turning point. One of a few turning points I'm sure people could mention last year and maybe years prior that things were not heading in a good direction. But this is the latest edition. This one will be in Indianapolis, Gainbridge Fieldhouse, the exact same day that the Big Ten football championship will take place, this one being earlier. I mean, what a great day. If you're an Indiana fan and you're going to be either traveling up to Indianapolis or up in Indy, maybe you already live in Indy and you're just going to go to the games and you're going to make an entire day out of it. Or maybe you're going to make a whole weekend out of it if you're traveling up there. I mean, what a great thing to be able to do. A nice little, Christmas gift to yourself, that sort of thing. I'm sure tickets are not cheap, especially if you're planning on doing, if you're going to double dip and go to both the basketball and the football games. But either way, if you're somebody who has the means to do that, then more power to you, because hopefully you're in for a treat on both sides of things, basketball and football. So we'll talk with Nick about that as well. I mean, we are in the thick of it. There is so much going on right now. Football, basketball, the coaching carousel in college football. You're finally seeing some of those dominoes fall into place. And the most prominent of those was Lane Kiffin. And we'll maybe I'll set aside some time here in the next episode or two to kind of go over the coaching carousel and what's really gone on. Because in previous years, whenever I was doing these shows 3 times a week, I would kind of dedicate a day to doing something like this. But we kind of get more to the meat and potatoes, especially the Indiana focused stuff, now that we only do 1 show per week. But I do think it's worth talking about, especially real quick, the lunacy that is Lane Kiffin. I mean, the dude, I was listening to the Joel Klatt show earlier on Monday, and I think he laid it out pretty simply and concisely. Like, everywhere Lane Kiffin has gone, he has exited that program in maybe one of the weirdest ways or worst ways possible. I mean, you have an 11-1 Ole Miss team. I believe that's a program record, regular season for the Rebels, and you're going to be in the playoff. You know that. You have a team that could make a run, maybe even win the entire thing. And instead of staying with your team, you decide that you're going to go to LSU and start over and try to do the exact same thing that you're already doing at Ole Miss. And I know that your resources are better there, and maybe you're more set up for long-term success at a program like Ole Miss, or like LSU. But I mean, maybe I don't want this to come off as like whiny, but at the same time, I think a lot of people feel the same way about how this was handled. I mean, the players that you're recruiting to your program at Ole Miss to do what they have set out to do, and then you actually pull it off, and then you just leave it all for dead. I mean, it's one of the most selfish things you could do, I feel like, in sports, not even just college sports, not even just college football. And I like Lane Kiffin as a personality. He gives some really interesting sound bites. Very not unlike Kurt Signetti, but again, they're both 2 very different people when it comes down to it, I feel like. But when it comes to just the way that they're entertaining via the media, I think that's what makes him kind of appealing, I guess, to listen to in some way, shape, or form. But I'm glad this isn't happening to Indiana, of course. But I did want to kind of give my 2 cents on the situation. But now that domino is falling, you're starting to see other dominoes fall as well. And again, maybe in the next week or so, we'll kind of lay out all of the movement that has happened in college football. So, all right, we're going to go ahead and get into our guest segments for today. Mitchell Paige, of course, and then later on we'll bring in Nick Coffey, as I mentioned previously. But before that, real quick, I want to tell you once again about BetMGM. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM just yet, you can still use the bonus code ON3, and you'll get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. You first download the BetMGM app, sign up using the bonus code ON3. You'll deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game. You'll then receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets. If your bet loses, just make sure you use bonus code ON3 when you sign up. And as always, make this college football season and basketball season one for the history books. Make it legendary. See BetMGM.com for terms. 21 plus only. U.S. promotional offers not available in New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. First bet offer for new customers only. Subject to eligibility requirements. Rewards are non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire in 7 days. In partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Joining me now here on Big Ten Championship Week, the Big Ten Championship Week edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, Mitchell Paige. Who else would it be? He's our tried and true weekly football guest. I feel so lucky and blessed to have him each and every Tuesday on this show. And I'm glad that you enjoy your time here. At least I hope you do.
Yeah, we were talking about it before. I love coming on this show. It's the only one that I do consistently, and that's for a reason, because you're the best.
Well, I will take that for the compliment that it is, no matter how true or false it may be, but I appreciate it. We've got Hoosiers and Buckeyes in Indianapolis playing for something that Indiana has not won since 1967, except back then it was just a share of the title. I believe they shared it with Minnesota, I think I read. Indiana went on to the Rose Bowl, lost to USC. I believe that was who's the I can't even think of the white Bronco dude's name. Y'all know who
O.J. Simpson.
Yeah. It was O.J. Simpson's USC team that they lost to in the Rose Bowl. Indiana will be trying to do something that hasn't been done since before you and I were born, since before probably a lot of people who watch this show were born. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I said earlier during during one of my solo segments, if you're somebody who was born on or before 67, let me know. I'd like to know if you remember or have any recollection of when Indiana won their most recent Big Ten title. But nonetheless, that is the scene ahead of us, amongst other things. We'll try to take it one by one. I don't want to just spew all of it out at once, but we got a Big Ten championship game this Saturday.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I was thinking about this as I was walking out of Ross-Ade Stadium. It feels like when we started this season, to say lightning in a bottle last year, it's not doing that team justice. That team was just really good, but we just hadn't had success like that in so long. So you had this just something in you that was hopeful that wasn't the case. And I saw this season, there was a lot of stepping stones to prove going forward, not necessarily for the rest of the year, but looking into 2026, 2027, like stepping stones that you can build on. We talked about it earlier. A lot of people look to the Illinois game. A lot of people were talking about how good that team was, but for whatever reason, I didn't see that as a stepping stone. I shouldn't. I probably should have, but I just didn't. The biggest one that I saw when I looked at the schedule was going to Iowa and winning. That was a true tough test on the road. You don't have a home crowd at your back. Last year it felt like magic in Memorial. You just couldn't beat Indiana there for whatever reason. So that probably has a lot to do with what I was thinking about with Illinois. Just I knew there was going to be a great crowd and the players responded. How are you going to do in a hostile environment when you kind of have to conjure up your own excitement and your own belief? And they passed that test. And I'm thinking no matter what happens for the rest of the year, that was a huge test for where this program's going. If we can find a way to beat Oregon on the road, great. Find a way to beat Penn State on the road. And obviously this is before they lost a lot of games, but as they showed, still a very talented team. Those were stepping stones that I thought, maybe. And then they just go out and pass the tests. It feels like they've taken however many stepping stones for a season you can have in terms of the longevity of the program. They just have stepped and stepped and stepped and not really missed a beat. Can't imagine there being when you're talking about where are we going to go and what does our program look like, can't imagine there being a bigger stepping stone than taking on what is truly the bully of college football right now. It's the most talented offense, most talented defense. When you look at just the recruiting rankings in America, they've showcased it. Don't feel like they've even gotten out of first or second gear yet. They're kind of the looming giant. And if you can go and punch them in the face and win that game, I mean, how else to announce to the world that you all better look out, we have arrived?
Yeah, I mean, people are saying, I've seen people say that this is a meaningless game from I don't want to dwell on that phrasing of what this is, but
yeah,
there are so many things at stake, and again, it's outsiders. So I just want to, I guess, preface it before I get into everything that really is at stake. First of all, we've already mentioned just the historical factor of it for Indiana's perspective, but you have basically, this is the Heisman game. You have Fernando Mendoza taking on Julian Sayin in a prove-it game. Who's the true best quarterback of 2025, who wins college football's ultimate individual award. You're playing for a 1 seed in what would likely be the supposed easiest path to a national championship. And this is essentially, if these two teams are legitimately the two best teams in college football, which based on regular season results are the only two unbeatens left, they are. Of course, we'll see how things play out on Saturday. This could be a preview in a sense of what a national title game would look like. Now, you go back 10 or 15 years, this is the national title game. You don't have conference championships. You just have one game. The BCS put it all together. I think I've seen a lot of things where people are comparing the CFP rankings with what the BCS would look like. This would still be the national championship if it were the BCS system that you had back when there was no playoff. So if this were traditional times, this would be your national championship this upcoming Saturday. But because we love college football and the longevity of this postseason now. This is merely an appetizer of what could be to come over the next month and a half.
Yeah, that's crazy to think that this could be the national championship, but it's I'm just going to keep saying it. This Ohio State is the champ. And I don't think, I mean, Aiden Fisher talked about it today. It felt like last year we were truly the underdogs, the David versus Goliath story. That's not the case this year, but they're still the champ. And if you want to beat them, you got to knock them out. And I think we're very fortunate to get the chance to do that now, find out what's good and what's bad as we get into a college football playoff run. But I've heard a lot of people talking about meaningless conference championships, blah, blah, blah. I can't imagine being in the locker room. You have a chance to play in a game like this and thinking, oh, well, maybe we should just rest up and focus on the college football. This is why you play. Being able to play for a trophy, look at the rest of your conference and say, now we're the champs, come fight us. That says so much for a program, recruiting. Cignetti already doesn't have to, he's in battles for recruits that we could have never imagined. And we've talked about it on this show before. Instead of him having to convince you, he just says, hey, I'm Kurt Cignetti, and he turns on the tape. But now he just hands you the Big Ten championship or something. Like you're taking the next step. These games absolutely matter to the people that are actually involved in the program, the people that have actually played college football. This is a pinnacle that you can reach. When you set out your goals, we want to win every game, we want to win the conference, and we want to win the national championship. So to say that it doesn't matter, I've never understood that argument.
Looking at this game specifically now, and the mountain in a sense of what it is to climb. Like we saw what they did at Oregon. We called that kind of a mountain that Indiana could maybe they could do it, and they did. When you think about fast starts, people act like that's the most important part of a game. I think it's great to have the early momentum, get things rolling on your end, get the offense feeling good about itself, that sort of thing. But if you look at this past weekend at Ohio State specifically, they, in the early going against Michigan, looked like they were headed for potentially their fifth straight loss against Wolverines in the Big House and maybe missing out on another Big Ten championship. And we're sitting here looking at an Indiana versus Oregon rematch based on how other results played out, that sort of thing. First of all, I'm glad that's not what played out. But second of all, that start was not at all indicative of what happened in that game. Michigan dominated the first 5 minutes of that game in Ann Arbor. Ohio State dominated the other 45, whatever it was. And I think it just goes to show we're going to learn a lot about if Indiana is up to the task of playing with a roster that is as talented as Ohio State that can will their dominance. And we've seen Indiana do it to inferior opponents as well. We're going to find out when these two teams match up who really has that upper hand when it comes to when you're going pound for pound for an entire 3.5 hour game, who's really up to the task of that.
Yeah, we used to talk about it. You can't win the game in the first quarter, but you can lose it. So a fast start is important, but I think not having the opposite is more important, where you have some turnovers, you make some silly mistakes, and you get down, because then now you're out of rhythm and you kind of did it to yourself. Versus if Ohio State gets out to a hot start, they're kind of clicking, they score a couple early touchdowns, but you haven't really, they just made some good plays, and it hasn't felt like you've done anything to cause those that they're really good players too. They're going to make some plays. It's much easier to come back from that versus make some mistakes, self-inflicted type stuff. Now you start pressing, you get a little nervous, and then things really start to snowball. So I would expect both teams to come out fairly methodically, understanding that this is going to be a game that's won in the third and fourth quarter. And what's funny is that feels like maybe it hasn't happened for either team until the fourth quarter, because it hasn't happened very often for either team that they play into the fourth quarter. But
Mhm.
it doesn't feel like either team has really jumped on somebody really early and then beat them by 1,000. Everything's felt like a slow churn that turns into an avalanche. That's kind of the style that both teams play with, and it'll be really interesting when the going gets tough. Indiana's had those moments. Ohio State has not, because they're really
Not
good.
as many. I do think they've had they had the again the little bit of adversity this past Saturday, and then they really weren't challenged other than the opening game against Texas. I feel like.
Yeah, but if you watch that Texas game, that was Ohio State on training wheels, and that's kind of where this whole narrative started, that they really haven't gotten out of first or second gear. And that was, they just were better, and the score just felt a lot closer than the actual game. And that's the same thing with Michigan. They just kind of lean on you. They get a lead, they lean on you some more, and they just suffocate you. They don't care if it's 100-0 or 30-3. They just kind of take your will the same way that Indiana does. So I think obviously there's a ton of talent at Ohio State, but last year at this time we were talking, do we have the whatever it takes to compete at the highest levels? And I think the highest levels, maybe like a top 15 type team. Well, now you're going to find out real quick. Do you have the whatever it takes to compete with the highest level, the top 1, 2, 3? And that's a huge jump. A lot of programs never make it. Penn State really struggled to make that with a great coach over a long period of time. Indiana, no matter how you slice it, they're new to this. This is a bigger stage than they've played on. I would argue this is a bigger stage than the first round of the college football playoff last year.
Absolutely. In the general sense of things, like Indiana being where they had come from, of course, there was nothing bigger than playing in the college football playoff at the time.
Yeah. It's a 1-2 matchup. Like, this is a monster stage. So far, Indiana this year has played like a team that belongs. And I think that's the hardest hurdle to get over internally, is understanding that we can do this. We belong on this field. Now, this is the ultimate test of that. They're saying all the right things early in the week. I would love to be in those film sessions, especially the ones without the players, where the coaches are trying to dissect what we're going to do against this coverage. Because Ohio State, to their credit, man, they're fast. They're disciplined, especially on defense. They make it tricky, and Mendoza has not faced a test like this yet. If you go out and beat this Ohio State team, it's going to be pretty hard to argue who should win the Heisman Trophy.
This may be potentially an obvious answer, or you may give me an obvious answer to a question. I don't know which direction you're going to take it, but do you think that this particular game, given where maybe things are at, maybe you get deep into the third quarter and things are tight, is this an empty the playbook? Like you may see Indiana or even Ohio State do some things that they've not put on film yet this year?
Yeah, I think you're at that point of the year where I'm not hiding anything. Like,
yeah,
we're showing who we are. This is win or go home, win or you're dead kind of time. You don't try to hide anything anymore. You challenge whoever's you're playing to stop it. You know what we're going to do. Good luck. We're better than you. And that's the mentality that I would guess both coaches go with. Let's go full gas. Ohio State hasn't won the Big Ten. That's by far the most successful team over the past 30 years in the Big Ten, and they haven't won the conference in
since
5 years?
2020, I think, which was that was the year where Indiana technically could have gone, but because of the weird COVID rules, there was some weird finagling that, because you had the head-to-head that year as well, where Indiana lost by a touchdown. But again, that was a very strange situation how things played out.
Yeah, but they haven't won since 2020. So
exactly.
I mean, it's Ryan Day and people. Last year,
by the way, that dude, I don't know if you listened to his post-game his post-game comments on the field after they beat Michigan. That dude has a swagger about him. Maybe that's corny for a white dude like me to say. He has a demeanor. That dude is all business. And Kurt Cignetti's all business as well. They do it in a little bit of a different way. Ohio State is, not only are you a head coach, but you're running like a multi-billion-dollar business when you're the head coach at Ohio State. You have to be all business and then some. With Kurt Cignetti, especially because you only have a 2-year sample size, he kind of started off as a hype man in addition to being a head coach that turned into the all business man. It's just two very interesting takes on being a head coach in this type of situation, I feel like.
Yeah, I would guess if you ask Kurt Cignetti, he would much prefer to be like Ryan Day than the Kurt Cignetti last year.
And I think he has been for 90% of this season, maybe more.
I totally agree. Totally agree. But to your point about Ryan Day, I know I'm an IU fan, but I think Ryan Day is the best coach in college football. It just recruiting at an incredible level, being able to reload, having a bunch of different pieces and making it work on offense and defense, putting your players in the best position to succeed no matter what their skill set is. That's where really great coaches start to showcase how good they are. Cignetti has clearly done that. Clearly, it's just over the long term, Ryan Day still a little bit ahead. But, I mean, you think just back to last year, Ohio State loses to Michigan, doesn't win the Big Ten championship. They had just won a national championship a couple of years ago, but haven't been to the Big Ten in a while. They were going to fire him. So if you don't think that this game matters to the players that were there last year, to the staff that was there last year, understanding how important it is, not like a forget you fans, but kind of like, remember 365 days ago? Well, now since then I've won the national championship. I've gone undefeated. I won the Big Ten, and we're going to win the national championship again. That's probably how they're talking in that building. And what's funny is the reason, yeah, of course they want to win it for them, but there's got to be a little something in there like, hey, fans, remember that. There's going to be no hold back. Even if we lose, let's just make sure that we still have a couple tricks up our sleeve. No, this is going to be empty it out. Let's go win this game. Whatever we have to do to win it, let's do it.
And this is another kind of a hypothetical. I was talking with somebody else about this earlier today. What do you think's more dangerous? If Indiana defeats this Ohio State team now and then rematches them in the national championship game, or you face Ohio State, of course, and then lose instead here in the Big Ten championship game, and then you have your rematch. You're trying to get revenge as Indiana in the national title game.
Yeah, it's just so funny. I don't know.
All of it's a head. We're all just talking head games here. That's all this is, I feel like.
Yeah, I want to go with the Cignetti mantra. This is one game at a time. You have a chance to do something that hasn't been done in 60 years, and I just keep coming back. I've always talked about high school recruiting being the foundation of the house, and to show you're trying to get into those upper echelon recruiting battles that Ohio State's involved in every year. Go show you can beat them in the biggest game of the Big Ten schedule. That's a little bit different conversation you're having. So when we get to the college football playoff, we'll have time. I would guess, and I don't think I'm saying anything groundbreaking, I would guess no matter what happens in the Big Ten championship, they're probably both getting a bye. So you have a little bit of time to digest what happens and then start talking about college football playoff. But yeah, I'm so envious of those guys. I can't imagine what this week prep would be like, how focused every single person in that building is. Because that's like the most fun part about it. Of course, it's exciting. There's a lot of people, a lot of buzz talking about the game. But when you're playing for something like that, the focus that you can feel from every player, the Aiden Fisher and Elijah Surratt, all the way down to the freshman walk-ons, how focused every rep in practice, every meeting, everything is just, we've built so long for this. Let's finish it. Man, how cool would that feeling be?
Is there a way? I feel like I'm pooping on your parade by asking this question right now, but is there a way to over prepare for a game like this?
Yes. If you do it incorrectly. I think ultimate focused, understanding what's at stake and making sure that you're playing within the game plan and playing within yourself. That's the ultimate focus I'm talking about. But when you start adding a bunch of new plays, stuff you haven't done, you have guys going to different positions, just changing up the formula, the recipe that got you to here. That's what I call over preparing. And that can happen at the coach level, that can happen at the player level, nutrition, changing up the diets, whatever it is. Over preparing to try to make sure that every little thing is perfect. The game won't be perfect. Things are going to happen just as they do in every game, but you've built this identity at Indiana. Preparing to kind of lock in what that identity is as you get ready to do something really cool. That's the kind of focus I mean, is just the stuff you normally do it a little bit tighter, do it a little bit better.
If Indiana wins, do you think there's a particular, couple of plays that's the difference? Is it a mistake by Ohio State that maybe you weren't expecting? And you can call it an Ohio State mistake. Maybe it's an opportunistic play for an Indiana defender, that sort of thing. Maybe it's a strip sack near the end zone, something ridiculous like that. What's the defining moment for Indiana if they pull this out? And maybe it's not. Maybe it's just complete utter dominance like we've seen all season long. And I'm not predicting by saying that Indiana goes and wins 35-10. I'm not saying something like that, but just you can tell from start to finish that Indiana's the better team. I feel like it can go in different directions, but what say you on if Indiana wins, what's it look like?
Yeah, I don't think it's one specific play, although it is funny. When you go back and watch games, there's 150 plays or whatever it is, and feels like each individual play as they happen isn't a game-defining play unless it's obvious, right? Like the Omar Cooper catch, that's a game-defining play.
Yeah.
But over the course of a game, probably one or two plays in the first quarter, one or two plays in the second quarter, and then on, you're like, man, that play changed the course of the entire game. And you can have one play that goes the other direction, or one direction, and the one play that goes the other direction. And those are kind of ebbing and flowing, but it always seems to come down to just a few plays over the course of a game that decide who wins. But what I think I haven't watched a ton of Ohio State, maybe 4 or 5 games this year, but they protect so well on offense. And you saw it with Michigan, got no pressure. I think they had 0 quarterback pressures the whole game.
Wow.
And you let someone like Julian Sayin with that much talent that he possesses himself, and then all the skill around him. Now they've got a back that's emerging as a dominant star in Bo Jackson. They've got a couple other dudes. They have dudes everywhere. If you can't put pressure on the quarterback, you just have no recipe for winning. I think that was one of the most impressive things that Indiana did at Oregon. Obviously, Dante Moore has a ton of talent. He was the favorite for the Heisman at the time that they played him. And Indiana was in his chili all afternoon. And when you can get a quarterback off his quarterback's so finicky too. Like if you're in rhythm, you can just go. But we've seen it with Mendoza a couple times. You get maybe some guys falling into his feet when he's trying to make throws. He just gets a little antsy, gets a little uncomfortable. They get off by this much, and throwing the ball is all timing and ball placement. If you're a little bit off on timing, your ball placement gets a little bit off. Now it's incompletions, and those things just snowball. So being able to apply pressure on Julian Sayin is going to be, I think, the most important determining factor in the game. And then second, how well do we protect Mendoza? I think those two things are going to be by far the most important. Run game, all that takes care of itself. I think you obviously have to run the ball. You have to play great defense in the secondary, but getting pressure on the quarterback and protecting the quarterback are always going to be at the top of the list for me.
Another thing that's going to be really interesting to see is playing Ohio State in what will be, I believe, a very neutral environment. And it may be more Ohio State leaning just because there's so many of their fans literally everywhere. I'm sure we'll have a strong IU contingent as well. But if you think back to last year's Ohio State game in Ohio Stadium, I mean, there were so many issues. The noise, you had some penalties that ended up being detrimental when it comes to helping Ohio State get some easy scores at certain points in the game and really turning the tide in their favor. I do think you maybe you don't eliminate that entirely in this environment, but it definitely significantly diminishes the chances of having something unfortunate like that take place that could be, game defining, as we've been talking about for the last few minutes.
Yeah, the crowd will be fractionally nullified.
I hope it's 50-50 or at the very least like 45-55.
I think it absolutely will be 50-50. I could probably, and that's obviously a 80,000 person stadium or whatever, so my list of 30 people that have texted me that they're going isn't going to be a lot, but I mean, I don't know that many people, so that's a pretty big percentage.
Is it a sold-out game? I know sometimes these games don't sell out.
Oh, yeah. Tickets for the top row are like $450.
That's
yeah, it's a huge game, and I would expect there to be a huge IU crowd. But one thing that's a little bit different, and this is a weird thing that I'm going to say, but it is factual. Indiana basketball fans understand how to cheer for basketball. And that's why they're so unbelievable. No matter how good the team is, Assembly Hall can have a huge impact on the other team. Indiana football fans are loud, and they are really good. But some of the little details, how important a thing can be.
I love that you're addressing this, by the way.
Yeah, we just haven't seen it yet. We just don't know. Ohio State fans are like Indiana basketball fans. They understand every intricate detail that happens in a game. They understand why a player is lined up here versus here. Indiana fans are getting there, and I can tell you just in the section that I sit in, relative to last year, the understanding of what we're doing and why we're doing it this way, why we're running the ball versus throwing the ball is just exponentially grown. But it'll be really interesting when you have that many Indiana fans that will be loud. They'll be phenomenal. I think that every game at Memorial Stadium has been insane. But now you pair it with probably the best traveling fans in college football.
I think that's fair. Like, a fair assessment.
Historically, the best traveling fans. It'll be a super fun environment. But I haven't answered your question yet. I'm getting there. I'm going to do that right now. So maybe you miss some of the crowd noise that causes the false starts, but it'll be interesting. Indiana hasn't played in a game of this magnitude. So how do you handle the pressure that comes with it? Ohio State's kind of been there. Their quarterback hasn't, but their staff has. A lot of their players have. They understand that this is a huge game, and it's an elevated stakes kind of game, and they know what's at stake, but they've been in these kinds – they just won the national championship. So they've been in these environments before. I think we'll know pretty early on how Indiana settles in with the pressure.
Yeah.
I wouldn't expect it to be too big of a moment. I'm just bringing it up as something that could possibly happen. What I anticipate happening is Indiana coming in extremely prepared, battling, and ready for the moment, and making this the kind of game that we expect it to be, standing toe-to-toe, and who knows what happens at the end. Toe-to-toe, I don't even think does it justice. That kind of makes it seem like David and Goliath. These are two evenly matched teams, and I expect Indiana to perform like that. But you have to acknowledge that we haven't been there. So there's a chance that maybe there's a little bit of nerves early, and you get some plays like last year, the drop punt that leads to a touchdown, the punt return right after halftime that leads to another touchdown. That game wasn't a blowout.
Not until the mistakes.
Not until the drop punt and the punt return. It was not a blow. I think it was 10-7 at half, and we were fighting. And that team, talent-wise, was I would say a step below the one we have this year. So you eliminate some of the silliness, and I was just listening to some of the press conferences earlier. It kind of self-admittedly, we just weren't ready for the moment yet. But now they've been there a couple times. They've gotten punched in the face. They've gotten uncomfortable getting punched in the face and realize, okay, if we're going to play in these kinds of games, we got to act a little bit differently. We got to perform a little bit differently. And we've seen that over the course of this year. So I would expect Indiana to do exactly what they always do, which is play really clean, really composed, and make game-winning plays. That's all that they've given us. So how can I expect anything different?
Yeah, I was thinking about, like, over the course of the season, when have they really done things that were out of character? And the only thing that comes to mind, and I don't even really think it was their fault. We talked about this back when it happened, but it was at Oregon with all of the defensive line shifting that was causing the false starts and kind of getting them off schedule, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only time this year where I feel like that there were mistakes made that could have cost them in situation, like, uncharacteristic mistakes, I should say. Like, things have happened, like interceptions, that sort of thing. I'm talking about things where you're shooting yourself in the foot, that type of stuff. That doesn't really happen. But again, a lot of that was due to something that at least you and I thought was nonsense or even illegal in some ways.
Yeah. So they've gotten shaken up a little bit. I think they got shaken up at Penn State. I actually just watched that game today.
The entire game?
I'm a nerd. I watched the entire game today. I didn't watch. I was working, so it's just on the background.
It was background watching.
But it was so interesting that that game played out like every other game this season. They got up 17-7. They got an interception, and it just felt like, all right, here they go. And it was really the only time I can remember where they didn't put the gas pedal down. Even at Oregon, they throw the pick six. They go right down the field, 75 yards, score a touchdown, get an interception, get a field goal, get an interception to win the game, gas pedal down. They didn't really put the gas pedal down to the last drive. So it was just having experiences like that where you don't have your best stuff, don't have your fastball. You have guys that just make plays. Charlie Becker, Omar Cooper. Surratt, I think, got in a little bit of a rhythm against Purdue, even though we didn't really need anybody to. It just is. This team they've made plays more so than last year when things were a little tight and we needed someone to do something exceptional to get us on track. And that's a huge difference because we talk about little plays throughout the course of a game, changing the result. Having experience doing that when the game's on the line, Ohio State doesn't have that, for better or for worse. So when the game gets tight, who are you going to call? Ghostbusters.
Is there an Indiana analogy you used instead of Ghostbusters? I was trying to think quickly on my feet, but I was like, well, we'll call the Ghostbusters apparently.
Yeah, I couldn't think of anything else. Ghostbusters.
I guess to kind of put a bow on all this, I mean, I feel like the best case scenario, from a national, like when you're thinking about national perspective of this game, this team, of course, other than a win, is if this is you've already kind of hit the nail on the head a little bit about this earlier. But if this is close throughout, competitive throughout, you can't see much separation between these two teams. I think no matter the result, if that's how the game is played, that's what you're hoping for as a fan and as a viewer, I'm sure. But that's best case scenario for, when you're thinking about big picture stuff. And this is big picture, but even bigger when it comes to making a run and maybe even having that potential rematch in the national championship. If you get to that point, that's what you want to see ultimately, of course, on top of getting the win in this game.
Yeah, I think there's a scenario where if this game's a battle, whoever loses gets the 2 seed and whoever wins gets the 1 seed.
Oh, absolutely, because they're the only two. You could have argued before if A&M went undefeated that they could get the 2 or even the 1 potentially. But now that there's nobody else that hasn't taken a loss, if these 2 teams are really number 1 and 2 and they're not easy to separate, you can't drop them lower than that.
I agree. So a lot of the work is done. Now you get to do the fun stuff. You grinded through the season, had some just kind of slugfests near the end. I'm thinking about Michigan State. I'm thinking about Wisconsin. Games that weren't necessarily pretty, but you just punch them repeatedly until they die. And then you move on. Now you got a little bit of rest. Go smash Purdue in the freezing cold. That game was freezing, by the way.
I saw it was the coldest game on record at Ross-Ade Stadium, which I couldn't believe, to be honest.
We had to leave like right before the end of the third quarter because my wife's feet were like frostbitten. So.
Oh, dang. So this is worse than the Notre Dame game last year, the Purdue game at Memorial last year? Weather-wise, I guess.
I mean, Notre Dame was freezing, and maybe the adrenaline helped a little bit because you were so excited for the game that it kept you a little warmer. But yeah, Laura, my wife, is trooper of all troopers. She's been through the coldest of the cold. You can't even imagine. And when she looked at me and was like, I think I got to go, that told me all I needed to know, that it was time to go. I
Just
did have
like
my
you
shirt
with,
off.
hey, I need to go to the hospital. I've got a kidney stone. You didn't know it was a kidney stone, but,
Yeah, I
role
thought
reversal there.
Yeah, I thought my internal organs were shutting down, but maybe that's a little dramatic. But I did have my shirt off, which was nice. I'll probably have my shirt off at the Big Ten Championship if I can find a way in there. If we can,
You got to convince them to take the roof off, and really make it a football environment. I actually don't want that to happen. I don't want Mendoza acting like he's never thrown a pass before.
Let's get it at feeling as much like Miami as we can. That's pump in the humidity, make that thing 95 degrees.
Bring in the mosquitoes, do all that good stuff.
Let's play this game in the Everglades. That's what I want. That's stupid. That's one of the dumbest things I've ever said, and I've said a lot.
We sound like SEC fans right now.
Very similar, except okay. I'm not going to say wow. What I was going to say is bad. You can. It's probably.
I think I know the direction you were going. We can leave it at that. We can get off the exit ramp right there.
Yeah, if you have an idea of what I was saying, it's probably not as bad as you think it was, but shouldn't say it is what I'll say. But yeah, I mean, the fact we get to talk about this, dude. 3 years ago, we were on this show asking for some fight. Just some fight.
Like now that's what Purdue's asking for. I mean, they look horrendous for 2 seasons in a row.
That was us, dude. That's why
I think it was worse than where we were at. But either way.
I agree. They're bad. They're bad. I don't know if we can, because Indiana's never been as good as we are now, and I didn't watch Purdue. I don't know what those teams were like. I just played against them, and we were not very good on defense, so they scored a lot. We just weren't really good at all in any phase relative to the team now. But, yeah, I'm not envious of that situation. I much prefer to cheer for us. Much prefer.
And I'm glad that that's what we're doing. And hopefully we say this every week. I mean, but we are officially at this point in uncharted territory once again. The team just went unbeaten. We really haven't even addressed the significance of that, and we don't really need to. We've gone almost 40 minutes. This team's 12-0. This team is 12-0. It is very hard to do that. I don't care how hard or easy your schedule is. Going 12-0 is very hard in any stretch of the imagination. And this team figured out a way to do it. And now they're going to try to be 13-0 and then 14-0. And I don't even know what would be a perfect record. You're 16. In the quarters if you win at 13. You'd be 16-0, right? That's a perfect record with the current playoff system.
Yeah, can't be 17-0 because if you were.
And let's throw this out there. There's never ever been a 16-0 college football team, because last year's Ohio State team lost to Michigan in the regular season.
And Oregon. They lost twice last year.
That's right, because Oregon was were they unbeaten in the in the national or going into the playoff? So yeah, either way.
Yeah. But I do want to real quick, just because this game's in my home city. That's
right. You're living in the suburbs of Indy.
I'm right in there, dude.
You are like in downtown Indy. I always just picture you in the suburbs of Indy.
I wish, but the stadium is like 12 minutes from my front door. So any fans listening to this, hit me up on Twitter. I'll be around downtown with the basketball game and then the football game at night. Obviously, a very IU pro.
Are you double dipping? Will you be at Gamebridge for the basketball game? No,
I will not. I'm trying to sell some plasma to get Big Ten tickets. But if you're around, hit me up on Twitter. You know I love to interact and hang out. Would love to meet all the people coming into town, talk about the Hoosiers. Should be a fun day.
And next week, we will finally have a playoff bracket to react to, no matter where Indiana is at, whether it's a bye. I highly doubt that there's a scenario where they're not in one of the top 4 seeds, but we'll talk about that whenever we get to that point. So, Mitchell, as always, this has been a very fun conversation, and I am very, very excited to see how things play out on Saturday.
Go IU, baby.
We always love our segments with Mitchell Paige, don't we? Pleasure having him on. And hopefully, I feel like I say this every week. Hopefully, we continue to have things to celebrate about, and how great it would be if we're talking about Indiana football's, I would say, first ever Big Ten championship. It'd be their first since 1967, first in, of course, this era of college football. I mean, 1967. I'd be interested to know how many people that listen to this show were born either in 1967 or before. Maybe it's more than I would imagine. But either way, I'd be curious to figure that out. All right, we'll go ahead and move into our next segment. We're going to talk some Indiana basketball with my friend Nick Coffey. Of course, the Hoosiers traveling also up to Indianapolis to take on Louisville Cardinals and hopefully avenge their loss from last season. I mean, it was literally the most embarrassed I have been about Indiana basketball in quite some time, the way that they performed last year down in the Bahamas. I'm sure this year's edition of that game will be a little more forgiving, even if Indiana does not come out on top. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and welcome in Nick Coffey. A lot of good things to say about his Louisville team, and we'll roll this segment right now. Joining me now here on In Touch with Indiana Sports, it is a good friend of mine, a colleague. He is the host of Coffey and Company, Kentuckiana's morning news on 840 WHAS in Louisville, Kentucky. It is Nick Coffey. Welcome back to the show, my friend.
I'm happy to be here. Happy to talk some hoops. The last time you and I were chopping it up about the Cards and the Hoosiers, a little different situation. Obviously, you were ending the Mike Woodson era, and then the time before that, we were still in the Kenny Payne era on our end. So we've got a big game coming up where both teams feeling really good about where they are, which that's the way it should be.
Yeah, I'm glad you went ahead and mentioned those previous two meetings. I like that there's been these meetings, by the way, between Indiana and Louisville in the past couple of years. In my opinion, Indiana, Louisville, and Kentucky should always play every single year. I wish it was an alternating home and home. Unfortunately, this game is going to be in Indianapolis, but still very cool, especially for Indiana fans, having the Big Ten championship game also in Indianapolis later that night. But 2 years ago, you had the infamous Mike Woodson tricked me with Kenny Payne. Not a very fun, sexy game from either team, but Indiana pulled that one out. Last year, it was in the Battle for Atlantis, and to me, it felt like that was the true beginning of the end for Mike Woodson. But at the same time, for Louisville, that was kind of their first sign that, okay, things are really on the up and up here with Pat Kelsey now at the helm at Louisville. And of course, things ended up panning out really well for them in the ACC. Unfortunately, NCAA tournament, things did not go the way that they planned against Creighton. But now, heading into the beginning of this season, they have a marquee victory over rival Kentucky, something that Louisville fans weren't necessarily used to the last several years. And they were dominant in that win. They're number 6 in the country right now, probably feeling about as good as they have since a certain point in the Chris Mack era. So I guess I'll start with this. In year 2 of the Pat Kelsey era, how are Louisville fans kind of feeling about where things stand with Louisville at this moment?
I think so far, so good. I mean, really, you couldn't have gotten off to a better start. I mean, you could certainly nitpick and find some areas where they could have been better, but to have the win against Kentucky, and right now it's tough to know just how valuable that win is as far as your resume. Have a hard time thinking it won't have some value on Selection Sunday, but for the program, I mean, that was needed in a big way, not to just finally get Kentucky and beat them, but also do it in that way to where Louisville was really the better team from start to finish. They had a couple of stretches where they led that thing by nearly 20 points. It did get up to 20 points at one point. So I don't know if I'd say they're still riding the high from that. The win against Cincinnati took a little bit of a hit as far as value, as they lost to Eastern Michigan, which was a terrible loss for Wes Miller. But I was at that game. I felt impressed as far as just them being able to win a game that was not played at their pace. Cincinnati, a good defensive team at the time, number 2 in the Ken Palm when those two teams played. So that was a nice test just to see what they do when they're unable to really dictate pace. But those are really the only tests they've had up to this point. Indiana is going to test Louisville in a big way. I think more than anybody, maybe in the non-conference schedule as far as style of play. You know, you go back to that Indiana-Louisville game from a year ago, the Battle for Atlantis. That was the first time I saw Pat Kelsey's team, against, of course, a competent opponent, get out and play the way he wants to play. Fast, taking chances on defense here and there, but really getting up and down and shooting as many threes as you can. High volume shots. And it worked out well. It was really just a storm that Indiana never really recovered from. But this year, I mean, I think both teams like to play the same way. Indiana's a team that they're at their best when they're playing fast. They've got a lot of shooters on the floor at all times, and when there's a lot of possessions, a lot of movement, they get good looks, and they got guys that can fill it up. Same thing can be said about Louisville. So as far as where the cards are right now, it's been a while since there's been this much enthusiasm and this much excitement. But obviously, even throughout the season, I think you've been able to see that you could slip up and lose to a good team, and Indiana is certainly that.
Yeah, and you've also Louisville will have one more game before they face off with Indiana. They have Arkansas and John Calipari later this week as their first true road test before they play up in Indianapolis. How do you think that, like having that game kind of sandwiched in between everything that's already happened and then this upcoming game this Saturday, how will that test Louisville as they prepare? And I'm not acting like Indiana is more competent than Arkansas. It's kind of too early to tell that how those teams compare. But having that true road test of having that environment, how will that fare whenever they go up to Indianapolis this upcoming Saturday?
It'll give them a nice test to see how they are in a true road environment. I mean, Fayetteville, they support their basketball program in a big way, especially when there's some success there. And they've taken a couple of losses so far, but it's been a weird year for them. They have two wins. They have more than two wins, but two of their wins have been against the teams you're just expected to beat. One of them, I believe, is Samford. The other one of another mid-major type of program that could have easily gone the other way. Could have been bad losses at home for Calipari. But then yet he's got two losses that are good losses as far as quality. They lost to Michigan State, I think they lost to Duke. And in those games, I mean, you could argue that Arkansas was better for about 30 minutes. They just couldn't hold on. So, with all that said, Arkansas is going to be a good test because they are a good team. And that's going to be an environment that will test this team like they haven't been tested before. I'm not sure if it showed on TV, and I'm certain it wasn't a talking point within college basketball, but that trip to Cincinnati a couple weeks ago, that was 50-50 at best. And when I say at best, I mean Louisville probably had more fans there. I know that sounds hard to believe, but it was just that kind of a crowd. So this will be a true road test. And I think Louisville will have some good representation in Indianapolis, but nowhere near the representation that the Hoosiers are going to have just because of where their momentum is right now. It's in their home state. And of course, the Big Ten championship going on. So if there's real value here, I would say one, when you get to Indiana, different style of an opponent, but still a good team right before you get to another good team. But also, you will have been in a true road environment for the first time, which, hey, doesn't make it any easier, but at least you have a little bit of repetition as far as knowing that you're going into somebody else's house and you got to beat a good team.
Looking at Louisville's roster, there's not a ton, unless I'm incorrect here, of returning production from last season's team. I recognize Javon Hadley. I recognize Kenai Ruths. And then Kason Pryor. I believe he got injured during that Indiana game last year down in the Bahamas. But Ryan Conwell's leading scorer. Mikael Brown Jr. is one of the, if not the most impressive freshmen in the country so far. What do you make of kind of this new look in Pat Kelsey's second year? And I don't know, how does it compare, I guess, to last season?
Well, this year I think he has depth in the backcourt the way he wants, and I think the backcourt duo of Conwell and Brown. I'm not afraid to say that it's one of the better backcourt duos you're going to see in college basketball. You've got the best of both worlds with an explosive point guard who at times can just simply take over a game. He's the kind of freshman talent Louisville has really never had in my lifetime, and I don't say that to give you a hot take. I just Louisville honestly has not had many true freshmen be big factors, and this guy is one that's. I mean, he's that talented. And then Conwell, not a guy that translates to the NBA, but a veteran guard who can fill it up, just knows how to play the game. He's your prototypical guy that's played a lot of college ball. He's stuck around in college because you can get paid now. He's jumped around everywhere, and Louisville's lucky to have him. So that's their strength. Those two guys. That's what makes Louisville, I think, a special team. But then you go to the bench, and you're going to have a drop off, certainly. However, Kobe Rogers is maybe your best perimeter defender. Adrian Woolley was a 21 point per game guy, I believe, at Kennesaw State last year. Certainly a step up in competition, but he started to really find his groove. So as far as returning production, Javon Hadley's kind of your anchor. He's your veteran, a guy who really just kind of sets the tone as a leader, kind of a guy that doesn't have a real strength, but also doesn't necessarily have a glaring weakness. Kenai Roos is somebody that wouldn't be shocker if any night he has 20 points, just because I think he's shown that he's taken a big step forward. So depth is certainly something right now that stands out. And then shooting. I mean, any night you could get cold, but if Louisville's able to do things to get good rhythmic looks, just like Indiana, it's going to be rare for them to have a night where at least somebody's not lighting it up, because that's just how the team is built. I mean, with Brown and Conwell and McNeely, those guys in any night could have 4 threes and a half. That's just kind of how it is. Same thing could be said about DeVries and Wilkerson, just because that's how good, that's what they do. That's what they bring to the table. They're just lights out shooters. So for Louisville, I would say guard plays a strength, shooting, depth. The front court, I still think I wouldn't call it a huge concern, but you just haven't really been tested when it comes to just playing good front court players that are going to be a scoring threat. So Sananda Frew is adjusting to the college level, but certainly he's a grown man who has good experience from that pro level. But when it gets to a close game and the front court is a real a real focus of the matchup. I don't know what Pat Kelsey's going to do as far as this lineup, because you go with somebody like one of the more rare players you'll see. If Indiana fans aren't familiar with Ali Khalifa, he's as rare as it gets because he's a big liability despite being 7 foot, because he's not real physical, doesn't have great feet, kind of awkward, but he is a phenomenal passer. He can also knock down threes every now and then. So he's somebody that in spots can be a real weapon for you, but at times can be a real liability. So I would say strength is shooting, depth, and just guard play overall. But the front court's an area where I don't know if they have the pieces to maybe take out a team that might want to just try to expose you and just bang it down in the post.
Yeah, I don't imagine Indiana being a team that's really going to test Louisville in that regard either. As even someone as good as Reed Bailey has been so far, he doesn't have the strength and really the size to really be your typical big man down low. He may try to play like one at times, but it's not somebody that, he's not your Umar Ballo, for example. He's not your Trace Jackson Davis. He's not going to do those types of things like Indiana fans were used to the last several years. So obviously Louisville's gotten things done so far this year when it's mattered, of course, in the regular season. They played Kansas in an exhibition, weren't able to get it done in that matchup. What was their formula for success in that game with the Jayhawks?
Well, Kansas was physical. Kansas, I think, was a team that was a bad matchup for Louisville in a lot of ways. One, just because they cleaned up on the glass and they were able to push Louisville's front court around. That was a matchup problem for them. Now, I think it got off tilt a little bit for them because Kansas is the kind of team, like a Rick Barnes coach team at Tennessee did last year, like you're probably going to see Tennessee do this year when they play them, where they're going to sit back and say, look, we know the way you want to play as far as style. We know you want to run. We know you want to take rhythmic threes, but we trust our guys to physically be able to stop you from getting good looks. And we're going to dare you to make plays against us in the half court. And that's where Louisville at that time, it almost looked as if Pat Kelsey went and found 10 guys and said, hey, you guys want to play a game tonight? And I don't say that to make a poor attempt at a joke. It's just, it was a real reminder that when you've got a brand new roster with all new players, you can have all the practice and inter squad scrimmage stuff, but you don't know how anybody's going to react until you're in that moment. And so far, it looks like they were able to kind of grow from that moment, because when it comes to just sitting back and daring guys to go one-on-one, there's certain guys that can do that. And Mikael Brown Jr. can do that against a lot of players, but against a veteran Kansas team that prides themselves on defense, it was a little more difficult for him to do, to where everybody kind of just turned into, okay, let's take our time and instead of take our time and execute and find a formula to get good looks, it was kind of everybody taking turns jacking up shots, and it kind of spiraled. So I think that was two things: a bad matchup just as far as physicality, and really Louisville just kind of still putting it together. I think Indiana and Louisville match up really well together, and what I, as a Louisville fan, am anxious to see is if it is all right, this game has slowed down a little bit. I mean, I know Coach DeVries, I got the chance to see what he did against Louisville last year when he coached West Virginia, and Louisville came out on the other end of that. But I was really impressed with what his half-court offense did in that game. His son was injured and was kind of in and out when they played in that one. But for Louisville, even against Cincinnati, they got it rolling. I think at times it was because they just simply have some better players than Cincinnati. But right now, I would say if you're a team and Indiana may not be this team, because I think the way both teams, if you ask Coach DeVries and Coach Kelsey, all right, when is your team at their best? I think they would both answer with a similar answer as far as how they want to play, which could lead to a really entertaining game. But for Louisville, I think if you slow them down and really make them grind out a half-court possession, that could lead to some ill-advised threes late in the shot clock. And that's just, you may bury them, right? Because sometimes you get hot, or you could end up missing a bunch and it could get away from you.
You may have already answered my last question with the way that you kind of ended that last take there, but how do you Does this game really just come down to who makes the most shots? I know it's kind of cliche, but when those teams are playing the style that they do, it kind of seems like if you're having a cold night, that can be the difference between a win and a loss in this situation.
Absolutely. And I think the way this game, I could be totally wrong here, but I think the way in which both want to play, I think both teams, just because of who they put on the floor, they're going to have a good. I think both teams will shoot a good percentage. I don't know how many are going to be made from three, but I feel like that's a pretty even matchup there. Both teams are going to play a style in which those shots are going to get there. What I think really, and if that's the case, what I think could be the real kicker is when the game is played fast, there's going to be some loose turnovers, some careless play. That's just a product of that style. Who makes the other pay more? Who takes advantage of the mistakes you make, right? If Mikael Brown has a heat check three and it's short, long rebound, is Wilkerson down in the corner waiting to get the ball for a three, and then bang, you know, a quick three. You know, if that's coming off of a bucket that they just got on the other end before that. I mean, I think there's going to be some big runs here. And I think whoever can take care of the ball the best and make the other pay when those turnovers happen, to me, I can just see that being a real key here.
He's Nick Coffey. He's from Louisville, Kentucky, of course, on News Radio 840 WHS. A good friend of mine. I appreciate you coming on and doing this conversation with me, and I look forward to seeing what happens on Saturday.
Yes, sir. It was a lot of fun. Makes me feel like old times talking sports, talking Cards and Hoosiers. So happy to be here, and I think we're going to get a good game on Saturday.
A big shout out to Nick for coming on and sharing his wealth of knowledge on Louisville men's basketball with us. And I'm looking forward to hopefully a really entertaining game this Saturday. All right. Before we wrap up, as always, we'll go ahead and check in on some of the teams that don't get nearly as much attention as football and men's basketball. And we'll start off this week with women's volleyball. They learned their fate for the NCAA tournament. They have earned the 4 seed in what I believe is the Texas region. But first they'll be hosting Toledo at home. I believe it's one of those deals where they'll host until they face a seed that's higher than them. If they win and they face the favorite team on the other side, it would be number 5 Colorado. I do believe that means they'll also be hosting them in Bloomington. And I don't know at what point it becomes a neutral site, that sort of thing. But either way, congratulations to Indiana women's volleyball. That matchup against Toledo will be on December 4th with the match starting at 5:30, and I believe it'll be broadcast on ESPN+. So wishing them the best of luck and hoping that they can make a deep run in this tournament. And then we'll move on quickly to women's basketball. They were partaking in what was known as the Coconut Hoops Invitational Classic. I don't know if it was called Coconut Hoops or what, but before this, I don't even think this was part of the tournament. I think we already talked about this on the previous episode too. They took on Florida Gulf Coast, which is in the same location as this tournament in Fort Myers, Florida. They defeated them 82-64. And then in the Coconut Hoops portion of their schedule, they first defeated Gonzaga 76-72, and then unfortunately lost in what I believe was the finals of this game to Iowa State, number 10 Iowa State. That was their first loss of this season. They lost 106-95. So unfortunate, but still a good showing. Very high scoring matchup that was against the Cyclones. And then this week they'll take home. First of all, they'll return home on Wednesday. They'll take on Western Michigan. That game will be broadcast on Big Ten Plus. And then later this weekend, they will travel to open up conference play against Illinois. That game will be on live television, BTN. So shout out to Indiana women's basketball. I'm sure they'll be able to get back to their winning ways on Wednesday against Western Michigan and hopefully get off to a good start in Big Ten play against the Illini. So that's going to wrap it up for us today. Very excited about what's to come this weekend for really all of what's going on at IU right now. I'm excited to see how all these teams perform, more specifically or more personally, how football does, and hopefully men's basketball can get a nice win against Louisville, who has looked really, really good so far this season. So that would without a doubt be their most impressive win so far this year if they're able to get it done. Indeed. So until next week, this has been another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by thehoosier.com.